Okay, everyone, welcome back to another great episode of The Human Role. So today we are going to dive into compliance. I have yet another amazing guest, Jocelyn King. She is the founder and CEO of VirgilHR, which was built by HR and for HR to help with the compliance aspect. So Jocelyn has a really great long list of just experience and expertise in this compliance space. She's also has been really, really resilient, you guys, and just has really overcome everything you can think of when it comes to tech and also, her personal life experiences. So I'm really excited to have her share her journey with us, but then also get into how we can make sure we are staying in compliance, especially as tech is even more taking over the world than it was beforehand. So, Jocelyn, thank you so much for being here today. So excited to have you. And for anyone who does not know you in my network, I'd love for you just to give some of your background and how you found yourself here today with VirgilHR. And then we will get into the nitty gritty of what VirgilHR does for clients.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. And I'm happy we're finally able to make this work. So I feel honored that you have me on your podcast. And I hope I am able to provide some good value to your listeners too. So my name is Jocelyn King. I'm the CEO and founder of VirgilHR. I started Virgil about almost 4 years ago now, which is crazy. But before that, I was an HR practitioner as well. So I was a VP of HR for a company called Cybrary. It's a Series C education technology company out of the DC area. And prior to that, I was a VP of HR for North America for a company called Ocado Group, a very large international UK-based organization. And that's kind of how we met, is through a colleague of mine at Ocado, which is pretty neat. It didn't really matter whether I was with a big company like Ocado or a smaller company like Cybrary. There was a huge challenge across the board, and that was maintaining compliance, employment and labor law compliance in particular at the state and local level. When we were at Ocado, we were hiring a lot of people very quickly in multiple states, and it was just becoming increasingly difficult to track and comply with those laws. And so we were going on, and I'm sure this is very familiar to plenty of people, but we were going on Google. Google is our best friend and maybe our worst enemy too, because we'd be on there for hours. We'd wonder if an article that we found online was most up to date or was it even accurate? Who wrote it in the first place? Even as a big company at Ocado, there's only so much of a budget you can have for lawyers. And so that wasn't always an option. But when it was really expensive. So there weren't a ton of really good solutions out there. And what I hated out of the research more than anything else was the fact that it wasn't automated. It was very manual in nature. And you kind of had to figure everything out for yourself. And by that, I mean, let's say that you have an employee in California and she's requested maternity leave. You have to know what to look for when you go online, and you don't know if you're missing something. Why can't there be a tool that does that analysis for you and then tells you exactly what to do? And that's what I'd wanted to build. I wanted to build something that was going to be like a legal guide right there next to you. That was just there to kind of work with you on a day-to-day basis, because as an HR professional, you're often expected to be a lawyer and you're not. And it's a really uncomfortable position to be in. So I ended up quitting my job. I had some really incredible supporters, including the two co-founders over at Cybrary, who were the ones that convinced me to quit my job and were two of my first investors and really encouraged me to do this as entrepreneurs themselves. And so I did that about 4 years ago and went through this really interesting process of raising money in the tech space as a female. I didn't really know what to expect, to be quite honest. But it was really challenging and eye-opening, and I learned a ton along the way. And as I was doing that, I was also working with some really incredibly talented people on building out the product. And we've done that over the last 4 years and have been really, really successful selling to direct companies, some big, some small, but also to indirect companies too. Like in June, for example, we just went live with Bamboo HR. Bamboo HR now offers Virgil to all of their customers for free, which is really cool. So that's kind of where we are today.
Yes, such an amazing story. And also big shout out to our colleague Miguel who linked this together. Luckily, I mean, we both have busy schedules, but glad to be able to bring this to everyone today. And that aha moment of why can't there just be a system that does the things? And I'm so glad Jocelyn actually decided to make her own path because here we are today. And how cool is it that Bamboo HR is allowing this free, right, for clients on the back end? Because it is very critical. And like Jocelyn mentioned, the compliance aspect of HR people don't see. Lots of times as I'm meeting more people within this space, there are a lot of people that just think HR just talks to people or fires people, right? And that's not all of our job. Our job is actually huge behind the scenes compliance aspects, just making sure your setup is proper in the system, time off is properly set up in the system based on all the laws, even down to local laws, taxation, handbooks, you name it. Like we have to just know all the things. So now that we know what led Jocelyn into starting Virgil HR, I love to really get into like some real world consequences as we're talking about, for businesses potentially not being into the compliance. So prior to, AI, where I recently heard a really good explanation of AI not being cheating, but essentially it is taking everything in Google and kind of lining it all up for us together, which is great. But even AI has to be spot checked by a human, right? Even with that, nothing can be perfect. So let's get into like heavy consequences when it comes to a business not being in compliant. And then also like how technology, especially your platform, can kind of help pave the way for that.
It's really unfortunate because it doesn't just apply to the big businesses that are making the headlines. There are a lot of really small companies that are getting into quite a bit of trouble because they simply don't know. It's not because people have bad intentions or they're just ignoring information. They just don't know. I have a friend, and it's a really unfortunate story. She had a small business, I think maybe 5 or 6 employees. She'd had one individual who had wanted to stay on board as a contractor. And not knowing any better, she thought, well, it's cheaper for me. And if she wants to be a contractor anyway, then why not? So she kept her as a contractor for 3 years. And then the individual ended up leaving and sued them for wage theft because she claimed that she'd been misclassified as a contractor instead of as an employee. And she was correct. And the company went out of business because the fines were so heavy they couldn't afford them. And it's really unfortunate because it was an amazing company with an incredible mission and good people. That kind of stuff happens every day. You've got companies that are getting in trouble for not providing the right posters to their employees. They're not ensuring that somebody is getting the appropriate leave time that they're eligible for. They're not getting the right paperwork that goes along with it. We're seeing quite often on the headlines now, lots of trouble that companies are facing around AI usage, particularly in the recruitment process. We have this Workday case that's active right now. And so as a vendor myself, that of course is very applicable to me, right? So when in this case with Workday, for those of you who aren't familiar, I'll give like a very high level overview of what's happened with this case. Workday offers within their recruitment product some AI technology. And there are individuals that have claimed that Workday's technology is biased towards certain demographics. And so what a court is now considering is whether or not it is in fact simply the responsibility of the employers who've purchased the Workday technology, or if Workday itself, in fact, is also responsible for this discrimination as well, which is unprecedented. A vendor has not been responsible for that in the past. So we're kind of seeing a lot happen there too. It isn't just even employers, it's tech companies that can be getting in trouble for this type of malcompliance as well. So it's unfortunate because it's so much information. How can you possibly know it all?
Yeah, I mean, very true. I think I'm obviously on my side following the Workday lawsuit pretty closely. I do find it interesting just because I do repeatedly, especially in the consulting space, I do inform my clients that yes, these HCM platforms, can be great and they can help with automation and pull things together. But ultimately, it's you that own your space, right? Like when you're calling into a line and you just hate calling because supposedly this company never knows what they're doing, whoever you get on the phone. These people on the other end are dealing with hundreds of clients, right? And sometimes it is no excuse for them not to know something, but you essentially know your business more than anything. And so I am interested to kind of see, obviously, we don't know what's being pulled in on the back end, right? Research yet and what they're kind of going through. But I am interested to see if it was a true flaw on Workday side or if it was just, a company setup side. And as you mentioned, you don't know what you don't know. you may not have even noticed that things were being biased. I know early on in AI, I had heard from some colleagues that were saying some businesses were trying not to discriminate against certain races, that they were indirectly discriminating against
Mhm.
other races. And so it's like then they had to go back and keep rebuilding it. And then, it's an unfortunate story that you also shared about your colleague and her business, because lots of small companies are not, able to plan for a rainy day. There are a lot of employees that are just waiting to get ahead in some way. And so it's unfortunate that that happened. But this is why we really need to stress compliance and stress the platforms that Jocelyn has founded, because these are only going to be great tools and enhancements for you to kind of help you check everything. Of course, please try to do your best as you can to kind of stay on top of things as well. But it's always great to have those platforms because we definitely need the support. You're inundated with your day to day. You have emails, you have employees either coming to your door sill or pinging you left or right, sending emails. I mean, we really have to kind of stay up abreast of that and kind of keep things going. So make sure we, in some way, embed that into our daily operations. And kind of curious, Jocelyn, to pick your brain on how leaders can embed that compliance awareness maybe daily at this point, because I feel like every hour something's changing. Almost to the point, in my opinion, you let me know if I'm right or wrong here, but like we can't just do it on a quarterly basis, or we can't just say, okay, increases are going in January and July. It's almost like they're just now all over the place. And then we've got all these other different localities and so forth coming about. So what would be your suggestion on kind of implementing compliance spot checks, very frequently?
I'll start off by very selfishly talking about my own product for a moment, because one of the things that I've been very passionate about is automation. I think that there should absolutely be a mechanism in which you are educated on a daily basis about what laws are changing, but you have a place where you can organize those laws in like a calendar. And there is a product that will create tasks for you when you have to increase somebody's minimum wage on October 1st, or you have to provide a minimum wage poster to your Michigan employees by February. And, all these things that you otherwise wouldn't catch because it's just little stuff, but all there in an organized fashion for you within a piece of software. And then it moves into other aspects of the employee life cycle too. Like, for example, let's say that you are terminating an individual, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, the timing of final wages is going to be impacted. What goes into final wages, what paperwork needs to be provided. All of that stuff is either in your head or you're researching. Having a tool that just walks you through it, guides all that paperwork for you, and tells you when it needs to be given to an employee by is really key to consistently maintaining that culture of compliance. But moving away from the tech for a minute, when we're just talking about a culture of compliance, what's going to be most critical out of anything else that you can do as an HR leader in your organization is getting buy-in from your leadership team that compliance is important across your organization, and that they're going to be bought into also ensuring that they in turn are enforcing compliance as well with their team. Not just enforcing compliance, but educating individuals on why compliance is so important and why it needs to be a part of the culture, whether it's to ensure fairness and equity or to make sure that somebody is safe. That's all going to be really critical. So that's first and foremost step. And that can be a really hard thing to do, getting people to care about compliance.
Even when we talk about the supervisor or management level, right? It is very hard. I guess some supervisors or managers that are in their role were just, could have been with the company for quite some time, or was the next level that they needed to get to. And trying to get them to understand, right, the severity of things sometimes when they are also just used to doing their day-to-day is really difficult. So changing that employee experience and stressing the compliance needs for them is really important. And sometimes it takes them to see the number. Unfortunately, sometimes it's like a claim has to come through for them to realize how serious this is. And then, that could be a little bit too late, just depending on the situation. But I do like the idea of just training people. And of course, using the VirgilHR platform, you guys, I mean, this is what it was built for, to help us with the automation, to help us with this compliance aspect. And I'm glad there are things out there that we can now utilize just to kind of get us over the curve, I guess you can say. It's better to be proactive instead of reactive. And so this is one way for, leaders to definitely like stay ahead of the game and not have to go about playing catch up. Do you agree, Jocelyn, or anything else that we could kind of like add to the bucket there?
Yes. So I think another thing, actually something interesting, my very first job in HR was at Target. At Target, we had, it was metrics upon metrics. And within the HR metric that we were measured on a daily basis, some of it was like compliance with scheduling, for meal and rest breaks, and then how efficient we were from a payroll perspective. Another thing that I remember was actually basically when an employee was working a shift that required a rest break, and you were having them punch in and out of the time clock. The system, we carried these like walkie-talkie type things. The system would vibrate the walkie-talkie and make it shake if somebody hadn't clocked out on time. So we could warn another manager, hey, your person needs to clock out in 5 minutes or we are out of compliance. And if somebody didn't clock out, then the HR metric would get dinged. We would have a bad score that week. And I remember I was 23, so I went to my boss and was like, can you please make this manager that keeps on not paying attention to this stuff, can you please tell him that he's got to do it? And she said, no, you need to learn how to influence your peers. You go do it. And so I started bringing them donuts every morning. It was the early morning shift, and I started spending more time with them and helped them really see that I cared about what they were doing. Please care about what I'm doing. And it worked out really well. I say all of that and I share all of that to get people perhaps thinking about ways that you can incentivize your managers to stay compliant, whether it's making it part of their review process or whether it's having some type of discretionary bonus associated to preventing something from happening or just having like consistent good best practices on compliance. There are a number of ways that you can incentivize people, whether positively or negatively, to really get them to champion that culture of compliance.
Yeah, I also find it kind of cool how at the age of 23, you somehow recognized the need to kind of like help people and build those relationships. And then that, led you into HR. And now you've built your own platform and you're continuing to help people and extend an arm in a great way. And I think that does go a long way. I know sometimes now, it's funny, I just had a conversation with a colleague last week and we were kind of talking about, okay, is HR missing the bucket where the donuts and the coffees and the free pizzas, all the jokes and memes that go around online now, like, is that no longer valid? And I think there's a layer where in some ways it is still valid, and in some ways, of course, we want benefits in other ways. But I think in many ways, that just goes a long way. You don't know if someone's struggling to eat that day. You don't know if it's like, okay, they had to rush through traffic. And so that donut or that pizza is going to be helpful for them. So I think if we can do that on top of enhancing benefits in general, that's great. And then, of course, staying in compliance. But I love that story just because you always had it in you, clearly. So guys, go check out Virtual HR. But I'd also want to just get your advice for women specifically looking to get into the SaaS space, the tech space, and just like anything that maybe you wish you knew, like things that we may not know right now that you wish you knew ahead of time as we all step into this new world. And I think there's going to be more women continuing to push and open the door in the tech space, but I'd love to get kind of like some of your insight, especially in the highly regulated industries.
Sure. Okay. So on the starting the business side, it's interesting because a lot of people might think, oh, go find a mentor that's a female who's done this before and, all that. Certainly very, very, very helpful. But actually, most of the characters in my story were men who were just very supportive of getting a female to the next step of where she wanted to be. And I was super, super fortunate to have had a group of incredible people who helped get me there. So it was less so a matter of gender for me and more about that level of passion they had for what I was doing. And maybe even a little bit of who I was as well, because there's that relationship building aspect in there too. But when you're trying to get into tech, you do want to at least know enough to be dangerous in the sense that you don't have to be familiar with how to code or what the languages are or AI models or anything like that. You just have to understand if you're about to build a tech product for HR, what do you want it to do? How do you want it to work? How does it differentiate itself amongst other products that are out there so that when you can speak to a developer that you're going to for the first time to say, hey, I really would like you to build a prototype of this product that I'm thinking of, you can almost be that business analyst to them. These are the requirements. This is what the user is going to be doing. These are the problems and the pain points that they're having. Like, all this stuff because you've been there. So it's actually not as difficult as people think it is. It's actually quite easy. You just have to kind of have confidence in yourself that you know what you're talking about. So that's number one. Number two, if you're starting a tech company, is the financing piece. There are a lot of venture capital firms. There are a lot of accelerators and incubators that are targeted toward minority-owned founders. In many cases, they're targeted just toward women in tech. So finding those, which are not that difficult to do if you do the research online, even if you were to just, like in Atlanta, there's some really great minority-focused VCs in the Atlanta area. You connect with a couple of those, they introduce you to the next group, they introduce you to the next group, and so on, and you start building your network from there. Again, it's not as intimidating as one might think it can be. So the money part is really key when you're raising money, when you are trying to keep your money and spend wisely. That's really important. So developing an advisory board is something that will be super helpful for you. I did 2 different types of advisory boards early on, and then one a little later. The early on advisory board was an advisory board that was going to help me learn how to build a tech company. The second advisory board that I ended up building a couple years later was focused specifically around HR and how to perfect our product. So we were just in 2 different places, and you have to recognize kind of where you are. So having that advisory board was incredibly helpful for me. It gave me an opportunity to learn more about other areas of the business as well outside of tech, right? Finance. I didn't know that much about finance, and that's really critical when you are a business owner. So learning more about finance was key. Understanding partnerships, understanding go-to-market, so marketing and sales, what does that look like for your product? Is your product going to sell direct, or is it going to be indirect? Is it going to sell to both? There's a lot to think about there, and a lot of strategy that will dictate the way that you spend your money in the future, who you end up going to raise money from in the future, and ultimately, in general, just where your product will go. So that's all really key. And I don't mean to scare anybody by saying, oh, if you don't do it right the first time around, then it's just not going to work, because everybody knows that's simply not the case. But that certainly helped me quite a bit. So that's what I'd have to say about women in tech. Happy to answer any questions you have on that, or can kind of segue over to women learning more about tech.
Yeah, no, I think, no, all good stuff. I think just like the funding aspect is really critical. And I do love the advisory piece too, right? Just because like how you mentioned, your finance gap, right? And having to learn that and being willing to learn that. The sales, the marketing, the having your niche and knowing that piece is like, it's like brain overload sometimes. And then like you just don't know what you don't know, and then you get frustrated. I think sometimes that's why people don't move forward with things. But I like to encourage everyone to kind of just continue to tackle it, chip at it. And I myself, who have discovered how impulsive I can be now, it's like I've had to say, okay, if I can't launch, have a business idea, I can't launch it in 30 days because that's like just it's crazy, like compliance stuff like we're talking about. I will map out a plan and have to just like calm myself down, which is always, always good. But yes, we'd love to now kind of segue into women who just want to like, know a little bit more about tech.
Yeah. And by the way, sorry, one more thing to note on that, and that's sweat equity. Don't think that you're in a position where you have to pay everybody for their time and their efforts. There are many people that would be quite interested in doing work for free off sweat equity, which is what we did in the beginning. I mean, the advisory board, they were compensated with equity. And I think that helped a lot, because that's another thing too, right? Is let's say you don't know very much about finance and you want to bring a CFO on board to help walk you through whatever you need to do, whether it's that day-to-day accounting that they're going to help you with, despite that being kind of more elementary for them, all the way to forecasting, revenue forecasting, for example, or financial forecasting for the raises that you're doing with these investors. Paying a CFO might cost $200, $250 an hour for a fractional individual. You bring them on board as an advisor, give them a very small percentage of your company. It can turn into something really big to them in the future. It could turn into nothing. Who knows? It's a risk that they're willing to take. But then you're not having to use any money that you've gotten from investors, or maybe that you've just bootstrapped. You don't even have money from investors yet to be able to get that support without needing to have that spend. So something to think about. But in terms of women just becoming more literate with technology, I'd actually kind of like to shift this a little bit, if that's okay, and talk more about how HR could be more literate in technology.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you mentioned that, HR and IT, and in some cases, like in, who was it, Moderna, I think it was, that came and put the CHRO and the CIO role together. I don't think that that's something that's going to be super common. And it calls rather for a unique situation where the individual has expertise in both. You don't find that very often. So HR practitioners today, and this is, I'm completely generalizing here, so forgive me for being a little unfair, because I'm right there with them, right? I've started a tech company, but I'm not a tech expert by any means. And that is that we're not typically very literate in technology. And what that's caused is challenges with tech adoption, HR tech adoption across the board. And it's caused challenges with HR actually just being able to introduce more innovative products into their organizations because there's a lack of understanding or lack of knowledge. Perhaps it's there's some type of feeling of pressure behind it. And so you don't see it the way that you would with other departments in an organization. And so I think it's really, really important, especially with this new world of AI, that we as HR practitioners become as literate as we can in technology as possible so that we can maintain that change management function across an organization when new technology is being adopted, whether it's through HR or any other department, so that we can introduce new and really innovative technologies to our organizations and be that strategic business leader that we need to be to our CEOs and other leadership team members, so that we have a better understanding of what AI as a workforce really means and looks like to our own. That's all really key. And so I think that there is a huge opportunity, honestly, for ways that we can better educate individuals, including women, including those in HR, on technology. And there's an opportunity there for sure from a business perspective to do that. So if anybody is thinking about doing something like that, it's a gap that absolutely needs to be filled.
There you go. Now, not only did she start her career kind of lending a hand, she built a business. Now she's throwing business ideas our way. So that's why I love Jocelyn. Yes, I do like those insights because not that HR people aren't tech savvy, but I think there's many where we're just used to doing employee relations and talking to people and, the handbook side, aspect side. The idea of having to get into a system and outside of just like time cards or setting up, some onboarding or something and really having to dive deep into that, just the anxiety and the stress of that in general, and then all the headlines. So I find it really interesting. And just for me, just being heavy in the change management space, I don't shy away or run away from that. But I have many colleagues who are amazing at their job, but they are just like, whoa, what is that? It's almost like you want to like reject something like that. And change fatigue is a real thing, right? So this ever evolving thing, I think it's just confusing everyone. And I just would like to also say to everyone out there listening, like maybe just kind of like not get overly worked up about it. Just try it out, kind of like dip and dab when you have time, but let's like let the fire settle, I guess you can say. I think at some point we'll even out a little bit. And I like what Jocelyn, I like what you said, that you don't think it's going to actually be a real thing. It's going to be some one-offs, that companies may do. Because I think just finding that right person with that mix, but is that going to be too much for one person? And are we putting too much in just one person's hands? That's like my worry, because as we have just been talking about, compliance is a real heavy thing, and being multi-state is no joke. So all good things. Okay, well, Jocelyn, thank you so much for being here today. This was great. You guys, please reach out. Jocelyn will be attached to this post, and then also we'll have all the links to VirgilHR to kind of send that your way. I would definitely encourage you to go through their website, send a note over, connect with Jocelyn. And if you are struggling with compliance, to absolutely at least get a demo, at minimum a demo, because it's all great and everything that we absolutely need, especially in today's world. And take a note of what she just mentioned on the next business idea too. Those are all good things. So reach out to her directly. But Jocelyn, it was great. Thank you so much for your insight, and hope we could do this again sometime soon.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you guys. Well, I will be back in another few weeks for another great episode. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.